but as promised, not only will you be informed, you will also be entertained at this summit. We have a very special guest with us here this morning. She came dressed as she was. She moved chairs on me. There's Carl over there. Nacogdoches is a community of education and of literature, and probably the foremost personage in that history that we have here in Nacogdoches is the Pulitzer nominee Carl Wilson Baker, who came to Nacogdoches in 1900 and sent many of her poems and short stories and books here in the oldest town in Texas. So I'd like to introduce to you Carl Wilson Baker.
When my father first picked me up at the train station in 1900, it was a brilliant moonlit night, and we drove through town in the depot hack, in and out of the magnificent shadows of those trees. And I thought, as I think now, that Nacogdoches is so permeated with her history, as a garment it is permeated with perfume, that sometimes she has forgotten her history. She's forgotten the people of her history, and I wrote this poem. It's called Nacogdoches Speaks. I was the gateway. Here they came and passed, the homespun centaurs with their arms of steel and taut heartstrings, wild wills who thought to deal bare-handed with jade fortune, tracked at last out of her silken lairs into the vast of a man's world. They passed, but still I feel the dint of hoof, the print of booted heels, like prick of spurs, the shadows that they cast. I ask today that you remember those whose shadows are long and know that you are casting a shadow yourself. Thank you.
Well, unfortunately, I won't be that poetic, but I will be proud to introduce our next panel. Dr. Steve Ballard will be serving as our MC, as our moderator of this panel, and this deals with education. And again, what we tried to do through our tricentennial is approach all of these issues with an eye towards the past, an appreciation for where we are, but more importantly, a thoughtful hope of where we want to go in the future. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Ballard. We are missing one of our panelists who will be here. Is Senator Nichols in the room? There you are. Yeah, I just, this is one of those things that happens. The House members show up and work, and the senators come in late. But I just, I just wanted to bring that up. But Stephen, take us away, and let's get it started.
Thank you, Representative Clardy. And I want to say what an honor it is for me to be involved with the panel this morning. As interim provost here at SFA, of course, education is our mission, our central mission to this campus. And I think it was very fitting that in our previous session, we saw a great introduction to this session. The previous session was titled Race and Diversity in Texas, but did you notice how the conversation quickly became about education, public education in particular? And that's because it's not only important to each of us, it is, as using the subtitle of the previous session, it's all about who we are and who we want to be. Education is central to everyone in this room. It's not just important, it's essential to the future of our country, individuals, and the future of our entire country. So it's important to each of us and every person that you care about. I think we heard Representative Gonzalez say, educate the kids and you give them a shot. And he said, it's my kid. That's true for each of us, everyone in this room. And that's why this issue is so central to us, and it's at every level, from pre-K through PhD. Having said that, I'd like to introduce 3 members of our panel, and if Senator Taylor arrives, then we'll... Here he is. Okay, excellent. This is perfect timing. I'm sure that Senator Nichols will point out that state senators have great timing.
Yeah, impeccable timing.
That's right. I'm going to introduce very briefly each of our panelists. We're honored to have an outstanding panel this morning. And then we'll come back to kind of the central theme of why we're here and talking about education. First, to my immediate left is Senator Larry Taylor. He serves as chairman of the Senate Public Education Committee and is a member of the Senate Finance, Business, and Commerce Intergovernmental Relations Committee. Senator Taylor is a 25-year veteran of the Texas Legislature. He served as chairman of the Senate Public Education Committee and is a member of the Senate Finance, Business, and Commerce Intergovernmental Relations Committee. Before his election to the Senate in 2012, Senator Taylor served 5 terms in the House of Representatives. Senator Taylor is a lifelong Texan, born in Southeast Texas and raised in Friendswood. He attended Baylor University, where he received his BBA in 1982. Senator Taylor owns Truman Taylor Insurance Agency in Friendswood. Our next panelist is Representative Trent Ashby. Representative Ashby represents District 57, unless there's been some change.
No, we're good.
Okay, in the Texas House of Representatives. House District 57 includes Angelina, Houston, is it Leon or Leon?
Leon?
Leon, okay. Madison, San Augustine, and Trinity counties. Representative Ashby is the Angelina County Chairman for Citizens National Bank, and prior to his banking career, Representative Ashby was president of a regional title company headquartered in Lufkin. Mr. Ashby graduated from Texas A&M University in 1996 with a bachelor's degree in agricultural economics. You may notice on your program that Representative Farney was a member of this panel. Representative Farney did an outstanding job in the previous panel, and I don't think we wanted to impose upon her again to be in front of this group. However, she has done an outstanding job already. Representative Ken King, our next panelist, is currently serving his 2nd term as state representative for House District 88. His district includes 17 counties in the Panhandle and the South Plains of Texas. He currently serves on the House Public Education Committee, the House Environmental Regulation Committee, the House Administration Committee, the House Calendars Committee, and the Energy Council. He's also been appointed to the House Research Organization Board of Directors, as well as the Republican Caucus Policy Committee. Representative King was born and raised in Canadian, Texas, and is president of Black Gold Pump and Supply Company in Canadian. And then, certainly not least, Dr. John Zerwas is Representative MD, serving his 5th legislative term in the Texas House of Representatives. He serves the citizens of Texas House District 28, which encompasses northwestern Fort Bend County and is currently one of the fastest growing regions in the state. Dr. Zerwas graduated from Bel Air High School in 1973. After graduating, he also graduated from the University of Houston, and Dr. Zerwas earned his doctorate in medicine at Baylor College of Medicine in 1980. A physician for more than 30 years, Dr. Zerwas is past president of the American Society of Anesthesiologists, and more than a decade ago, he co-founded a Houston area group practice, which recently became part of U.S. Anesthesia Partners. He remains active in the operations of the partnership. And I also want to say that Dr. Zerwas was our most recent commencement speaker here at SFA, and so we consider you part of the Lumberjack Nation, so thank you for being with us today. To each of our panelists, again, in introducing the topic today, as we've talked about, our session has already, even from the breakfast speaker, the keynote speaker this morning, Commissioner Morath, did an outstanding job of setting the stage for the conversation to come. In particular, he recognized 4 key areas that he said from a policy view, and we certainly have a panel of distinguished policy makers with us today. We need to have the right North Star. And he mentioned four things that I think are especially critical. He mentioned governance, that we need to keep our eyes on what we're governing and how we're getting there, not focusing on compliance issues. I heard a lot of strong message in the Commissioner's remarks. Then he mentioned human capital, a great teacher in every classroom, a great principal in every school. And he specifically mentioned that teachers treat 20 patients at once and the patients move around. Remember that? It really is a great analogy. And then when he talked about the 3rd area, instruction, he talked about how the challenge is not just the key subject matter areas, they are critical. But he mentioned the word grit. Did anybody remember that or notice that? There's a wonderful book out there now called How Children Succeed by the author Paul Tough. The subtitle of it is catches my attention, and it's a wonderful book, but the subtitle is The Power of Grit, Curiosity, and Character. And those are the things that go beyond just the curriculum. And so I think Commissioner Morath was certainly correct on that in terms of the instructional areas. And then he mentioned scope. And in that area, and we've already heard some of this morning, a very powerful message. The rational part of our brain says one thing, the emotional part says something else. And our faculty on the campus right now, about 50 of them, are reading their way through a book called Switch, How to Change When Change is Hard. Part of that book uses a metaphor of the rational part of your brain is like a small human person that thinks a lot. The emotional part of your brain is like a big elephant. It goes where it wants to go unless it decides to listen to the rational part. And that's why it's hard to do things like get up in the morning and exercise. The elephant doesn't want to. And the rational part says, you know that's good for you, or eating the right food, or inculcating good habits in our lifestyles. But what Commissioner Morath brought that around to is that when it comes to scope, it's not just the curriculum. It's also a lot about families. And we heard that resonating powerfully this morning, I think, from personal issues and messages. And as we start the panel this morning, what I'd like to do is ask for comments about any of these areas, because your perspectives as policymakers are extremely important. We know that we face a lot of challenges, and so I'd like to start by talking about challenges, and then we'll come back to solutions. So let's start with Dr. Zerwas in terms of challenges to education at any level you would like to focus on, pre-K through higher education, and then we'll come back to solutions. Dr. Zerwas.
Oh, terrific, thank you. It's nice for the Z to get to kick things off, but you did catch me off guard on that. So, but I'm going to take advantage of the opportunity and definitely to get ahead of the senator, because the senators usually not only suck all the oxygen out of the air, typically they also take up all the time to talk. So I figure if you're going to go right down the line, and the three of us can just maybe give the senator maybe 5 minutes to close or something like that, at best, you know. So anyway, well, thank you, Steve, and thank you for your hospitality here. Wonderful place here on the SFA campus to have this kind of a conference, if you will, and certainly to the senator and to the representative. Thank you all for setting up this conference and putting it together. I've had the privilege of this past legislative session to chair the Higher Education Committee for the House, and that has been a great ride for me. I had typically been involved in the appropriations process for the previous 4 sessions, and I like to say I graduated from that, and they gave me a pretty nice bone to chew on, and that was higher education. And at a time where I think that there were some really important things going on. Higher education had, I think, a home run in terms of the accomplishments of the legislative session, and I owe that really to my colleagues in the House and the Senate, and of course to the vision of the governor in terms of where he places higher education in the future. But we are at a point here where I would say, we had a great success in a vision called Closing the Gaps, a strategic plan, if you will, where we really succeeded and actually exceeded all the goals that were identified in that particular plan in terms of getting more people into higher education, given that opportunity. And so, recently, Steve, what they came up with was the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board needed to sit down and say, okay, what do we look to next? What we clearly know is that Texas is not going to continue to be the very robust economy that it has, and really that great magnet to everybody around the country and around the world, unless we do something that is going to continue to foster higher education. My colleagues are probably going to speak to some extent more on the foundational ed, which is absolutely incredibly important. You can't get to second base until you've got on the first base. And so, but if the schools, put people into a secondary education scenario, higher education scenario, what do we need to be accomplishing over the next decade and a half? And what the Higher Education Coordinating Board basically came up with said that we have to have 60% of our 25 to 34-year-old working people by 2030 have some type of educational certificate or degree beyond high school. You might say, well, sure, that's easy enough to accomplish. It's a big gap. There's a big gap for where we are today and the pace that we're on today in order to be able to accomplish that. You heard Representative Gonzalez talk about all the people that are coming to his particular locale and looking for jobs and so forth. They're bringing typically a higher education with them, a higher education that a lot of them got from someplace else. You say, why should that be coming from someplace else? Why should we not be producing that type of product within the state of Texas? We have the resources, we had the expertise to do it, but are we going to be able to accomplish that? And so they set forth, these pretty lofty goals. It was chaired by Mr. Hunt, former regent at University of Texas, very, very involved in higher education. And they came up with basically a 4-point plan, basically, to further education in the state of Texas, and they nicknamed it, 60 by 30, instead of, it took the place of closing the gap. And that happens to be the first of what they have in terms of 4 basic goals that need to be received. 550,000 graduates as opposed to the 200,000 plus that we have now by 2030 in that working age group needs to be accomplished. It doesn't have to be a bachelor's degree. A lot of us think that, no, that's a 4-year degree. No, it could be a 2-year degree. In fact, the community college are a very critical part of this. And us being able to support and sustain our community colleges is a very, very important part. One of the challenges that we have in the future, in fact, along with all the challenges related to higher education in general. But it could also be a technical accomplishment, as was also mentioned in the panel before us. Maybe it is one of the more vocational type of goals. The Texas State Technical College is one of those places that the state has invested in order to provide individuals who have that kind of, tendency to move in that direction, to give them that opportunity to get that education and to get that training. And if they choose at some point to move on to some other level of education, that opportunity also exists for them. And so that's part of what this whole 550,000 graduates are. The third one is marketable skills. So no matter what you do in terms of your higher education, and I'm a believer in all breadths of education, whether it be the liberal arts up through the sciences and mathematics, which is kind of the route I went. In fact, I kind of wish I had spent a little more time in some of the liberal arts because it's such a unique time in your life in order to get that kind of education. And I have fellow physicians, in fact, who graduated with liberal arts degrees that, along the way got their science requirements and math requirements to get into medical school, but they accomplished that and had a very, very broad education. But, they had to end up with some kind of marketable skills. Yeah, obviously went on to medical school, that's a pretty marketable skill. But there are other things in some of these majors, if you will, that can be marketable out there in the economy that we have today. But there needs to be a focus on it. And so what we would ask our universities to do is that to be sure that all of the areas of endeavor have some kind of marketable skill out there that's going to translate into a place in the workforce out there. And then probably one of the biggest ones that we have on the table that I think is going to be a big hurdle for us is reducing the student debt. And that's, in fact, the 4th goal of the 60 by 30 plan. And that is to make sure that, less than 50% of our students have any debt at all. Well, that's going to be a pretty remarkable challenge. And that if they do carry a debt, that debt is less than 60% of what their income is when they come out of that and they go into the workforce. I had a very timely encounter with a person working at my apartment complex in Austin. We went in there to renew some things, and she was sitting there and talking. We got talking, chit-chatting about this and that. And she's somebody that had a graphic arts degree from the University of Texas. And she says, why can't I find a job with what I'm doing? She says, here I am. I'm working in an apartment as an assistant. It doesn't require a college degree. But I have to do it because the debt is so high that I have to be out there working somehow and making some money and stuff, And so, I think that is the plight of so many of the students that we have out there. And that is one of the challenges that we have. That 4th one going forward is how are we going to look at the cost of higher education? Is it becoming too much of a burden? Do we have adequate grant opportunities out there? I think these are big, lofty goals, but I think they're, as ambitious as they may be, I think that the state of Texas and the resources that we have in our higher education are there. And I do think that the legislature is going to take a good, hard look at a variety of things related to higher education, the cost of higher education, and being able to meet those goals. So, thank you, Steve.
Representative King.
What was the question?
What are the big challenges?
So I just finished my 2nd term serving on the Public Education Committee in the House, and my background is I served 5 years on my local school board in Canadian, Texas as president for 3 of those years. And so my background was property wealthy, small schools. That's what I knew when I got to the legislature. Problem is I have 17 counties and I have north of 50 school districts, and they're all really small, and there's the wealthiest of the wealthiest, there's the poorest of the poor. First thing that sunk into me when I was elected to the Texas House and on that second Tuesday and we swore our oath to uphold the Constitution, Constitution really only talks about 2 things. It says we're going to balance a budget and we're going to provide adequate public schools. Not for the property wealthy kids that I was used to representing. I swore an oath to uphold the rights of 5.2 million school children in Texas. Now that's the important thing. So when we think about what's right for education, and there's so many different things, it's everything from school finance. We have frankly, the courts are going to come back at some point and say schools are inequitable, and that's going to happen. What's going to make it make equity work? That's going to be a question that's going to get debated forever. We've been in the courts now since 1984 over that very question. And the problem is, when you talk about Texas and our 5.2 million school children, we have school districts that speak 39 languages. We're so diverse. So how much money is what's the right amount of money? So, if you say, okay, every kid in Texas is worth $5,000, just say a target revenue to say we're $5,000 a kid. Well, the problem with that is it is cheaper to educate 5,000 third graders than it is 50 third graders. Because the small schools that have to meet the same criteria, they have the same overhead, the same everything. But if they're only getting their 5,000, that's not as much money, or at least that's the way I learned math. So we really struggle on this one size fits all, which never works. Never works. The one thing we do know about government, the definition of bureaucracy is inefficiency, right? And so my goal is always to give more control back to the local folks. Let folks run their schools the way they run their schools. I don't believe it's my job to say what we teach in school particularly. It is my job to make sure school districts uphold our Texas essential skills. Fair enough. It's my job to give our educators the tools to teach our kids. If any of us, especially me, was in charge of educating our children, they'd all be in therapy. We need to work on giving our teachers and our professionals the tools. So finance, number one, that's the big deal. We have a huge facilities need in this state. I was a joint author on House Bill 4 this last time that was the pre-K bill. And, and I don't know any of you ever broke a horse, but I can tell you from experience, you have better luck training a horse when they're 2, not when they're 10. When you start when they're 10, it causes broken bones. And so while we did go a long ways in promoting public education and starting at the earliest levels, we didn't go far enough. And we didn't go far enough because we didn't want to. Frankly, we couldn't. It's to do full-day pre-K for every child in Texas that's that age, and the state paid for it. It's $6 billion annually to get started. And the reason isn't because it costs that much to educate 4-year-olds. It's because our schools don't have the facilities to house these kids. I've got school district, I literally have a school district that has a slide that's been there since the 50s. Yeah. They say it's really dangerous and it gets really hot when they slide on it. But, so we have a long ways to go as far as facilities. The other thing is, and the doc was alluded to it, when we did House Bill 5, we created 5 pathways to graduation. 3 of them are career and technical. Well, guess what got cut in 2011 when we cut public education, $5.5 billion. Career and technical funding. Now, and in our wisdom, we created 3 pathways for career and technical, and we didn't put the money back. That makes no sense to me. We've got to do that. We've got to promote our career and technical. You know, I am glad there's people like the doc that's way smarter than I am. But we also need guys that can turn a wrench and, you know, want to do those things. And in our small communities, and I know Nacogdoches is not small like I'm used to, but what's killing our small towns is kids don't come back. Well, if we give them the education and give them the opportunities to come back to our small towns and raise their families and open businesses, our small towns will flourish again. It's not going to be like it was 50 years ago. Not everybody's going to be a farmer. Maybe they're going to do something else, but they're going to be able to do it in our small towns. So, you know, I want to, those are the things that I focus on. You know, school finance, number one, is going to be the biggie coming next session. Number two, we've got to promote facilities. We've got to put something in our infrastructure, and that isn't just for schools. I mean, we can go on infrastructure on and on for highways and everything you want to talk about. And the third thing is, we've got to honor our promise. If we're going to tell our high school students, you have 3 pathways to graduation for career and technical, we've got to stand behind them, and not just with our mouth, with our money.
Thank you, Representative King. And that's a great intro for Representative Ashby, who's on the Appropriations Committee.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say it's the perfect intro, but it is an intro. Well, first off, I want to thank all of you for the invitation to join you today on this esteemed panel. And I think you've gotten a good glimpse of kind of where we are in the state of Texas, both from Dr. Zerwas looking at higher education, and certainly my classmate here, Ken King, who serves on the Public Education Committee. And you know, hopefully, why I'm so excited about the future of education in Texas and looking at these 2 leaders on those extremely important committees. And I say extremely important, you know, go back to when I first ran for the legislature, coming like Ken as a 5-year school board member. I ran largely because of education and the cuts that we had just recently seen in that prior session. And, you know, what I said then is what I say now, and I say it to everybody in every group, and that is, if we don't get this issue right, if we don't get education right, nothing else matters. And so I'm really honored to serve with so many members. You saw a number of them here on the earlier panel. You're seeing a number of them now, including Chairman Taylor over here in the Senate, who are deeply passionate and care greatly about the future of the state. And it largely starts with this issue of education. There's no way to get around it. And so it's important that we as a citizenry recognize that at the end of the day, as Ken said, what does our state constitution call for? There's a reason why it calls for those 2 essential things. We fund our state budget, we balance our state budget, rather, and we make sure that we have an appropriate diffusion of knowledge across the state, and that means having a quality education system. There's a lot of discussion about what a quality education system looks like, especially in pre-K through 12. But I've been very pleased with the work that we've been able to do over the last couple of sessions that I've been in the legislature. I think the reason why I'm on this panel is, as Dr. Buller alluded to, the Speaker asked me this past session to serve as chairman of the Article 3 subcommittee. It's a mouthful, Article 3 subcommittee on the Appropriations Committee, which basically oversees all higher education and public education funding in Texas. And it's been real interesting to have a seat looking at both higher ed and pub ed. And as I've been told and as I've observed, every session is different. This past session was very much a higher education session, and I want to really brag on Dr. Zerwas and being my partner over there running the policy side of this, because we made great strides. And I know our folks here on SFA on this beautiful campus, I know from Dr. Patillo all the way to, I know we've got some regents in the room, are very happy, I think, with what we were able to do for higher education this past session, especially in terms of some of the funding. Most colleges, our general academic institutions, the GAIs as we call them, most of them recognized anywhere from an 8 to a 10% bump in terms of their state funding this year and starting last year, this in the current biennium. Well-deserved and well-needed. Our health-related institutions, great need. Dr. Zerwas being a physician, he knows this. We have really been behind the curve in terms of really being out there and investing in our health-related institutions and making sure that we're able to take care of the health care needs of Texans. And so we were able to do a lot to both help fund our health-related, but also something you may or may not hear a lot about is we were able to greatly increase the number of graduate medical education spots in Texas, which essentially means we're able to train more doctors in Texas. And as the facts have borne out, physicians and training tend to stay in those communities and in those states where they seek out and are able to obtain that training. And so it was very important that we were able to do that to keep our physicians in training here in the great state of Texas to meet the burgeoning needs of this area. And then community colleges. You know, I would say when you look at higher education in general, we did a lot for our GA, our general academics. We did a lot for our health-related. There's much more work to be done for our community colleges. And as a matter of fact, we've got a hearing later this month on the issue of community colleges. You know, because while we're blessed to have Stephen F. Austin, a four-year university here in East Texas, there are a lot of regions of the state that don't have a four-year institution, especially in the rural areas and in some of the, you know, in the southern parts of the state and in the far northwestern parts of the Panhandle and whatnot. But they do have community colleges. And so for us to be able to help these individuals that live in those and reside in those communities to get a level of higher education that they may seek out, we need to make sure that we have those community colleges and they're affordable and that they're able to obtain the skills that are necessary for that unique region or county or multiple counties, whatever region or counties that those community colleges are based with serving. And so while I was pleased we were able to do some things in terms of increased funding, there are some really innovative ideas that are going on that pertain to how we can better utilize our community colleges, 50 of them in the great state of Texas. There's much more work to be done here, and I'm really interested in rolling my sleeves up and working alongside the Higher Education Committee to make sure that we're able to fully utilize those 50 community colleges across the state. And lastly, because I know you guys don't want to hear me talk for that much, but I would say that Ken's right, looking at next session, depending on what the Supremes decide here, very likely. I know, write it down, Ken. I did say that publicly. You are right.
When I turn my recorder on.
No. I do think, depending on the outcome of that case, I do think that certainly, as you all know, when we have to look at school finance during a legislative session, it does suck all of the oxygen out of the chamber. And if that is the case, we certainly will be spending an inordinate amount of time focused on how we go about providing a quality education in terms of funding for our kids across the state. And I'm biased, but I think Ken's right. I think the issue of equity is at the heart of this issue of school finance. And again, that's going to be, there's going to be a lot of debate about what's equitable and how do we go about funding an equitable education system in Texas. And certainly I look forward to participating in that debate. But I will say that there's a one-size-fits-all system largely in terms of education, whether it's higher or pub ed or pre-K for that matter, which I was really excited we were able to do is invest some public dollars in pre-K this past session. I do think that he's right, that you have to look at education on a local level. And continue with my bias as a former school board member, I will tell you that there's a lot of people that talk about local control, and then there are people that vote for local control. And I think that he's absolutely right that we need to, as a state, not get in the way of our locally elected school board members and their charge to help govern their local school districts and not shackle them with undue state restrictions and burdens. So with that, again, I want to thank y'all for having me today. It's a real honor to participate on this panel.
Thank you. At this time, we move to our representative, our senator representing the Texas Senate, but Senator Taylor serves as chairman of the Senate Committee on Education. And I'd specifically like to ask him also in his remarks to address the Next Generation Assessments and Accountability, the commission that's been established.
Okay, yeah, and I'd be happy to do that. We've heard a lot of the challenges. I mean, funding the diversity of our student body as well as our districts. just so many challenges with it. But overarching all of these things is we're in a transformative time. Our world is changing very quickly, and the purpose of a public education system is to prepare our students for life and to get all the potential we can out of every student that they can have a successful life in Texas. In this environment that we're in, though it's changing so quickly, our challenge is getting education to make that change as well, to catch up, to make sure we're preparing students not for 20 years ago, not for 5 years ago, but for the future that's going to be before us. You understand, we have kids who will be graduating from high school that will end up in careers we don't even know what they are today. I mean, think about your smartphone is 8 years old. And how quickly your smartphone has evolved and changed. And what these students of today are going to be facing in the future, we've got to prepare them for that and not for what happened 10, 20, 50, even 100 years ago. So that's very difficult. And you know, you've got teachers who were raised and taught and trained in the old ways of doing it, but we have to change that. We can no longer continue to teach education as if there's no internet. You understand what I'm saying? We had this big debate about whether or not you could take calculators in to take tests for a while back. And I understand you got to understand the basics and know all that stuff, but to ask kids today to regurgitate facts that all they can do is, you ask a child a fact question today, they look it up in 2 seconds, they give you the answer. So you have to restructure how you do the test. Teach them not how to do searches. They're already way ahead of us on that, but how do the search engines work? How do you make that work? And how does coding work? Coding is a huge thing of the future, and very few of our schools are teaching coding. And that's like sending kids out today. In the old days, it didn't teach them proper English. Coding is where it's at. And so we've got to be preparing these students, and it's very difficult, but there's a lot of things that have to go on in that. One, I think you have to look at modernizing the classroom. I call it moving into the 21st century. Use of technology is such a huge part of what you could do, and you can improve, and we talk about efficiencies. How much more efficient is it to bring technology in the classroom? In the class of the last 100 years, the teacher presents a topic, she gives homework on the topic, the kid goes home at work and works on it at home and brings it back on Tuesday. Meanwhile, the teacher teaches the next building block on top of Monday, Tuesday. The teacher takes the homework home, maybe gets it back Wednesday or Thursday. Meanwhile, she's adding on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, all what she started with on Monday. Get a quiz back on Friday, and she finds out half the class didn't get it on Monday. Or 2 or 3 kids didn't get it, but they're now a week behind. Versus if you do it with some type of electronic device, the teacher can present the topic, or they can actually have studied it before they even got to school. Then they can work together on it in the classroom. She asks a question, all the kids answer it. The teacher has immediate feedback. And she finds out that little Billy and Sue didn't get it, but the rest of the class would move them to the next topic and then go help Billy and Sue so they don't end up, Billy and Sue are a week behind by the time the quiz comes back. Think of the efficiencies you get out of that and the learning. And we have kids, we talk about a diverse population, we have kids who are already learning to read before they get to kindergarten. And then we have kids who are showing up kindergarten have never seen a book. So you can imagine the challenges we have. And a teacher can't sit down with 20 kids and read to them individually. But with one of these, this can help with that. It will read to them. And as they learn to read, they can start reading themselves. They come across a word they don't know, they can push it and it'll pronounce it for them. Or if they don't understand it, it can define it for them. Think of the possibilities and the fun learning. And we've got kids today who grow up playing 3D video games with people from all over the world. Have you not seen that? They got the little headphones. I go up, I hear my kid talking upstairs, and I go up there. He's flying against people from Germany. He shows up in first grade, and they give him a textbook. And he goes, well, what does it do, We might as well be giving these kids scrolls. It's that dated for where these kids are coming from. And you wonder why they're bored. Because they are leap years ahead, light years ahead of where we are. We had leap year this year, right? By the way, we got to solve another challenge. If you're born in Canadian, are you eligible to run for president?
Yes.
Okay. I was just perplexed with that. So we solved that one. But anyway, this is a huge deal, and it's not easy. Y'all all understand change, right? I know when I went through my office, we did the transformation over to technology from our old ledgers and handwritten, and it was hard. And there were times when it wouldn't turn on, or it'd just freeze up and stare at you and blink stuff. Remember, Remember the old DOS prompt? Anyone? Those were difficult times, but now we've made that transformation. Would anyone go back to what we did before? Well, we've got to do the same thing with education. It is difficult, it is challenging, but once we get to the other side, no one will ever want to go back. But we're in that time right now. We have to do this, and we have to invest in it, and we have to invest in our teachers, not just give them the technology, but teach them how to use it. Let me just tell you real quick. In Austin Convention Center about 2 weeks ago, they had a technology conference, technology and education, computers and education. And HP had this deal, doing a demonstration, and it looked like a regular monitor. You put these 3D glasses on. It was a beating heart with the sinus rhythm going across the top. And then they give you a little pointer thing, and you're wearing your 3D glasses, it's got a little beam. You went in that screen, and you clicked it, and you pulled the heart out, and the heart looked like it was right here. And you could twist it around. You could turn like this, and it would turn, and you could look around it. And then you could take that same pointer, and you could peel on the outer layer and peel the layer back and see what was inside of that heart. Or you could grab a little camera and stick it inside the heart and look around inside the heart. And it looked real. I mean, it was incredible. Think of the savings you could have for all these little labs across Texas where we're getting frogs now and do that. They can do it online with this technology. I mean, it is amazing what is coming. The 3D printers, you know, a lot of the kids are working on robotics, which is great because that's where a lot of this stuff is headed. But they've got 3D printers. They need something for their project. They go there, they design it, and they print it, and there it is. If you need a little scoop for your little robot or whatever, you can print it right there in the classroom. Where we are headed, I don't know. But I'm just telling you, it's amazing, but we have to go there, and we have to be willing to make that effort to do it, because once we're there, we will never want to go back to where we are today. And we are behind. I mean, you got to know this. Not just Texas, but the U.S. education system is behind. One of our biggest challenges right now is having kids prepared for higher ed or whatever they go to after they get finished high school. We have a significant percentage of our students who are not prepared. They're taking remedial courses in community colleges, in some colleges. One, that's a waste of money. Two, that's a waste of time. They should be better prepared by the time they leave high schools. We have some really good high schools, really good schools all across Texas. We have some good schools across Texas, and frankly, we have some that aren't getting the job done. So the balance, we talk about local control, the balance is, I've got one in my district right now that's being closed, but it's been failing for 10 years. That's local control to the extreme. So we can't just go to total local control. So let me talk about the Next Generation Accountability and Assessment Commission, and I'm sorry if I'm going long, but I'm pretty passionate about this. Pardon?
You are,
Oh,
Senator.
what? I thought I was getting filibustered earlier. I don't want to say anything.
We tried.
But one of the things is, what do we want these kids to know at the end of their public school career? You need to have a target, right? What's your North Star? I think we need to decide that. But then the second thing is, how do you measure progress? Now, y'all know about the tests. We got, what, 17 tests to graduate, and we cut that down to 5. And frankly, we still need to cut that back some more. But how do you test? And frankly, what is the test for? In my view, the test should be for the student's benefit. In today's technology, we should be able to track every student individually and not just use these STAR exams to grade a school. But where's the child? And why don't you do multiple tests during the year so you can measure the child's progress so it's not a punitive tool, but you can actually use it to help the student succeed, which is the bottom line is what we're all about. It's not about whether or not we have failing or passing school districts or school campuses. It's about students, and we ought to be able to track them individually. So this Next Generation Accountability and Assessment Commission, 15 members, all different stakeholders in education, coming together, you know, because we keep hearing from the school districts, well, you know, they keep changing this, they do this, they. This Next Generation Accountability Assessment Commission is us, all coming together deciding what are we going to do on how are we going to do accountability and assessment, because you have to have some accountability. When we first, remember Ross Perot? We found out kids were graduating after 12 years of public ed who could not read. That was no accountability. We can't go back to that. We have to have some, but it needs to be meaningful. So this 15-member commission of us is going to come up with recommendations for the legislature, and this is huge, because you know we've gone way too far on the testing. But there's got to be a balance. We're going to come together with all of us working together to find out where that is. They're going to make recommendations to the legislature, and we're going to move forward with that. And I think that has one of the biggest potential opportunities to transform education in Texas, just that one thing, by figuring out how we're going to do it and working together to come up with a system that works for everybody and benefits the students.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Taylor. All of these remarks have been outstanding. They're right on target, and we have about 8 or 9 minutes left, and so I'd like to...
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know I had 9. No, I'm sorry.
No, your timing continues to be impeccable. That was great. What I would like to do is just ask each person to spend like 60 seconds to 2 minutes on, because I'd like to go back to a quote that Representative Farney said earlier this morning. She said, in talking to students, where you go is up to you. And I think we all believe that. We have a personal responsibility on where we go. I'd like to ask each of our policymakers, because where we go is up to us. And what would you do, again, in less than 2 minutes, if you had the power to change everything? Where would you lead us? Dr. Zerwas.
Yeah, I'll be very brief, and it'll be in the form of a quote. In fact, I shared it in my commencement remarks up here at Stephen F. Austin back in December, and it's a quote that you're not going to find anywhere. I don't really know how I found it, but I was reading U.S. News and World Report. William Manchester had written an article, an essay in there in 1990, and the topic of the essay was 1930 to 1990, what's happened. And he went through a very, very eloquent treatise about what had happened, all the incredible changes that had occurred and so forth. And he just, did a great job of looking at what people who lived through that 60 years saw. And his concluding comment is that, the one single thing that was a consistent thing, and we've heard it many times over, it's almost, to say it again is obvious, and that is that the one common factor is change. And, but he said what is different and what really happened during that time was the pace of change. And I think that that's something that all of us have just shared with you up here, is that, the pace of change is what is at an exponential level. And the phone that you have today is obsolete because the next one is already ready to come out and so forth. It's that kind of pace of change. And he closed with a remark that I think just really speaks to the position I think we need to take ourselves into and to kind of position ourselves, and that is that he said that if the American of the 21st century, this is again 10 years before we've moved into the new century, that the American of the 21st century expects to succeed amid the accelerations of the 21st century, he or she must be very supple and malleable to change and cloaked in resilience and not self-righteousness. And I've considered that in my own career, and things that have changed in it, and the practice of medicine has changed incredibly fast. The implementation of digital technology into medicine, how very painful that is, I will tell you. But you're right, you don't want to go backwards on it, because just like it made pilots better in the cockpit, it makes me a better doctor by virtue of having that available to me. But that pace of change is incredible. I had to be supple and malleable to that change. I needed to recognize that this was a good thing, as painful as it was, and I'm in the business of getting rid of pain. So, that is something that was necessary to do. But by the same token, we've got to be resilient to what's going on and kind of shed this idea of being self-righteous, and believe me, doctors are famous for this, but to be resilient to the kinds of things that put the patient first in my world, and not be centered on me in a very self-righteous way. And so that's, Steve, just I think, something that I learned from that, and I have carried that forward, and I think it's a very powerful message to all of us as we go forward, that we have to, be, accepting of change to some degree, but also resilient and not so much caught up in ourselves.
Thank you. Representative King.
Well, Steve, just to prove that I have been watching the presidential debates, I'm going to talk about something that has nothing to do with your question, and then I'll get to that. So,
and I'm going to talk at the same time he talks. And, that's.
So, actually, Senator, the reason I'm going to do this is what I just wanted to add on to what you were saying about the technology and how important it is to our new classrooms. So, I want everybody to understand, it's a great example of when government gets in the way. So I sent a bill to the Senate, Representative Van Duver sent a bill. There were several bills back and forth because what we were trying to do is give schools discretion on how they spend their IMA allotment, instructional materials allotment. So in 2011, when we cut public ed, they combined the technology fund with the IMA. Okay? Well, the IMA traditionally has been all about textbooks. Guess who picks the textbooks? State board. Takes them 2 years to get a new textbook to my classroom. I've got a 17-year-old and a 13-year-old, and they do make good grades, don't get me wrong here, but I haven't seen a textbook in my house in 5 years. It's all computers, iPads, whatever. So what the bill would have done, what the legislation called for, was not to take complete control away from the state board, but to allow 25% of that money to be at the discretion of our local school boards for technology, because the two funds are combined. Well, long story short, my bill didn't go anywhere, thanks. Representative Van Dever's bill didn't go anywhere. So, but actually the reason they didn't go anywhere is my senator, Kel Seliger, had a better bill that encompassed a lot of this stuff, and we rolled everybody's bill into one. You guys passed it. We sent it to the House. The House passed it unanimously. It was a Senate Bill 331, I believe it was. And any Abbott people in the room, there you are. Governor vetoed it. Bad deal. Anyway, so we are working on getting more money in the hands of technology, because that Senator Taylor is 100% right. That's where we're going. You know, when I went to school, we still had chalkboards. There's not a chalkboard in the state of Texas left. I mean, we got to do it different. So, as far as now, back to your question. As far as if I had the magic wand and could change it all right now and do whatever I wanted to in the public ed world, I would create equal educational opportunities for all 5.2 million school children. Because let's don't forget, it's still about the kids, right?
Right.
Anyway,
Right.
that's
Excellent. Thank you. Excellent. Representative Ashby.
We'll see if I can do this in 120 seconds. You know, this week, what is it, Thursday, I guess it was Tuesday, it's National Reading Week across America, as probably a lot of you know. I had the privilege of reading to a group of second graders in Central, which is a small school district just west of Lufkin. And thank you. Fortunately, it was a book I could actually read. It was on the second grade level. But, you know, the thing that I took away from that in talking with those kids for about an hour is that the future is so bright. And while we, as policymakers, sometimes we get in silos and we have discussions and debates, whatever, at the end of the day, as Chairman Taylor and Ken just said, it's about the kids. And as I observe kids, I've got two boys in elementary and middle school, the future is bright. But if you look at the kids in Texas, the kids that I grew up with in just north here in Henderson, they look a lot different than the kids in Henderson today. They look a lot different than the kids in Lufkin and Latexo and other places across the state today. And so as we grow 160,000 kids in our public schools every 2 years, as the demographics of Texas change, as you listen to our demographers talk about a less educated and a more impoverished society in the future, the question we as policymakers have to grapple with, back to Steve's question, is how can we change and shift the paradigm? And I'm convinced, as Ken pointed out earlier, and as we've made some progress in, we've got to continue to look at investing in pre-K, not just 4-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 3- and 4-year-old, because as every study or studies have shown, that's where you get the best bang for your buck. So every kid comes into kindergarten with some level of basic education and that can do some reading. Secondly, I think we've got to continue, and this is something I'm going to speak specifically for since we're on SFA's campus, we've got to make sure higher education is affordable. One of the things that I hear in talking with college students and people that I live around that are at our local community college or that didn't go to college is affordability is an issue. And I think we've